Why theories are important in the application of study of motor skills includes motor control and learning. So, why is that theories are important in the application of the study of motor skills? Theories are like way of looking an art. They can provide a perspective that brings a collection of individual facts into a single coherent framework. As in art, a theory provides a perspective that connects individual elements into a unified picture. Then, a theory, in the case of human movement, allow us to see how the many individual elements comprising motor skills are connected. So it refocuses our intellectual perspective rather than a crazy quilt patched together from many isolated facts. So a single blended fabric or unified meanings indiscernible as you study the individual elements of motor skills. A solid grasp of theory will place them in a broader and more meaningful perspective. So, in conclusion, why is that theories are important in the application of study of motor control? Because it is important to us to identify the appropriate motor learning and motor control to get the optimal and effective results.
Meanwhile,
Question number 2. Explain how far you understand information processing model. So, for me, information processing theory is a cognitive theory that focuses on how information is encoded into our memory. The theory describes how our brains filter information from what we're paying attention to into the present moment, to what gets stored in our short-term or working memory, and ultimately into our long-term memory. So, the premise of information processing theory is that creating a long-term memory is something that happens in stages. First, we perceive something through our sensory memory, which is everything we can see, hear, feel, taste in a given moment. Our short-term memory is what we use to remember things for very short periods, like a phone number. So, and long-term memory is stored permanently in our brains. So, for example, is the eye receives a visual information and codes information into electrical neural activity, which is feedback to the brain where it is stored and coded.
meanwhile,
So, question number 3. Give one example of a closed loop system of information processing in relation to its definition. So, first, closed loop control or a closed loop system is a system that adjusts itself to varying conditions by feeding output information back as an input, unlike open loop control involves feedback, and this feedback is termed the perceptual trace. So for my example of closed loop system or closed loop control, my example is a snowboarder. So a snowboarder would feel through kinesthesis and proprioception that they were losing balance while snowboarding. They will know from their long-term memory that they need to act on this issue. They will make quick adjustments in order to retain balance, and the successful outcome will be stored in their long-term memory. So that is the example of my closed loop control or closed loop system. So in the closed loop control, the strength of closed loop control in a snowboarding, you can feel that you are losing balance through kinesthesis and through proprioception. It will helps you to know that from your long-term memory that you need to act immediately on this. While the weakness in the closed loop control, the feedback in the closed loop system may lead to a oscillatory response while you are doing a snowboarding. So that is my example and the strength and weaknesses of a closed loop control or a closed loop system.
meanwhile,
So, question number 4. Give one example of an open loop system of information processing in relation to its definition. Assess the relative strengths and weaknesses of an open loop system to your given example. So, for my example, is when throwing a dart, once the performer has begun performing the skill, there is nothing they can do to adjust it because the movement is too fast.
Meanwhile.
So in the fifth and last question, explain how far you understand the movement constraints in dynamical system theory. So in the dynamical system theory, the human movement as a dynamical system of many bodily and environmental subsystems interacting, it's limited by both biological and environmental constraints. So it's observed that constraints are boundaries limiting the movement capabilities of individual. So dito daw sa dynamic system theory is merong constraints o naglilimit sa mga movement ng isang individual sa kanilang capabilities. So it has identified the three categories of constraints. So meron tatlong constraints na na-identify dito na category. So first is ang organism and person. So next is the environment, and the last is the task itself. So all three can also act together to impose new forms of constraint. So for example of my constraint is here.
A few moments later.
System or dynamical system theory is first is the individual or the organism or person. So it's me. So first is the regular movement of squatting. Then the second example is the constraints, which is we use ball to have the constraint. So gagamit tayo ng bola para sa example natin na constraints. So ganito na yun. Ang squat na may bola. So, as you can see sa may example ko na yung first na example na ginawa ko is yung regular, which is hindi ako gumamit ng bola na doon sa napapansin nyo sa kamay ko is walang limit na nagbabawal or sinasabing hindi ko pwedeng gamitin yung kamay ko while nag-squat. So, the next is constraints. So, yung sa constraint naman is may, so sabi dito sa constraints are the boundaries limiting the movement capabilities of individual. So, dito, naglimit yung paggalaw ng kamay ko dahil may hinawakan akong bola. So, yun yung constraints na tinatawag or may boundaries constraints na tinatawag. So, habang nag-squat ako is may hinahawakan akong bola tsaka limit yung paggalaw ng kamay ko habang hinahawakan ko yung bola. Then, yung first example ko naman ng regular movement na walang bola or walang constraints is yung kamay ko is pataas bababa, taas pababa. So, walang limit yung paggalaw ng kamay ko doon sa pag execute ko ng example sa dynamical system theory. So,